What you're about to see is a historical dramatization of one of the greatest human dramas of all time, the recorded events of the campaign and siege of Vicksburg. But more than that, this is a story of the city and its people, a story of their lives and courage through this epic struggle. Much of the story is told directly by the Vicksburg participants themselves, as recorded by them in their diaries and writings. The Civil War is likely the most important single event in our nation's history because of its compelling impact on our nation as it is today. Vicksburg, the city and its people, played one of the most crucial roles in determining the outcome of the war. While the destiny of a nation was being forged, this unique little southern city carved its own role in history and forever became an indelible part of America's heritage. Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1861 was a city of contrast that mirrored its river heritage. For many, it was a city of opportunity, a city with elegant homes, churches, and schools, a city with charm and culture. For others, it was a frontier river town. For them, there was the opportunity for a rough and fast life, and occasionally, a fast death. The city itself had been built upon the high bluffs and hills overlooking the great Mississippi River. These majestic brown bluffs rose more than 200 feet above the waterfront. From the top came a dazzling panoramic view of the mighty river and miles of plantations. So grand was this view that a poet called Vicksburg the Sky Parlor, and Jefferson Davis called it the Gibraltar of the West. Soon that description would be the most accurate. Vicksburg thrived. Trade and business flourished. The city was the commercial center of a large portion of Mississippi and Louisiana. Professional people, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and journalists were prominent among the city's early residents, along with river workers, merchants, and manufacturers. With 5,000 people, Vicksburg was the state's largest city and indeed the commercial, cultural, and social center between New Orleans and Memphis. Vicksburg's roots, however, were in the soil. This was plantation country. Cotton turned the plantations white. It filled the riverfront warehouses and wharves, and busied the giant steamers with a steady stream of commerce. Against this backdrop of prosperity, the spring of 1861 came early, but the beauty and aroma of that fateful spring were lost in a silent fear and anxiety that hung over the city. The possibility of war was becoming very real. In the preceding few weeks, Mississippi had become the first state to follow South Carolina out of the Union. Jefferson Davis, favorite son of Vicksburg, had been chosen president of the new Confederacy. The events were confusing and uncertain. With little enthusiasm, Vicksburg was preparing for a war it hoped would never come. Still, it was business as usual on April 11, 1861. As twilight settled over the city, the busy daytime sounds faded into the sounds of night on that fateful evening. The gas lights and candle lights began to glow. And for the people, this quiet spring night was full of hope and confidence. The mayor had assured Vicksburg that the establishment of the Confederacy had been bloodless and promised to remain so. It was 4:30 a.m. As Vicksburg slept, the mayor's peaceful prophecy turned mute against the sounds of war. The guns of Fort Johnson at Charleston, South Carolina, had opened a fiery bombardment on Fort Sumter 3 miles away in Charleston Harbor. There was a federal garrison at Fort Sumter, and the Confederacy demanded of President Abraham Lincoln that the garrison be removed from the sovereign state of South Carolina. But Lincoln refused, and now the sounds of cannons and mortars signaled the beginnings of the American Civil War. Bloody months ahead, the names of little-known towns and places would be stamped forever into American history as the blue and gray armies spread death and destruction across the states. But for now, the city of Vicksburg could sleep peacefully. The sounds of war in South Carolina were still far, far away. The spotlight of the Civil War quickly moved from the east and focused for both geographic and strategic reasons on the Mississippi River and Vicksburg. The Mississippi River divided the Confederacy into almost equal parts. For the Confederate troops, the river was a lifeline along which came supplies and munitions. For the Union, control of the river would cut the South in half and cripple the Southern cause. The destiny of the Union and the Confederacy would be determined by the control of the Mississippi, and control of the river would be determined at Vicksburg. From the north and from the south, Union troops would systematically take post after post and city after city. After the first year of the war, only Vicksburg would bar complete Union control of the river. Early in 1862, Union Admiral David Farragut moved his naval fleet up the river and displayed a show of force at both Baton Rouge and Natchez. Both of these cities surrendered almost instantly. So an encouraged Admiral Farragut steamed north to Vicksburg, trained his guns upon the city, and demanded its surrender. Vicksburg was not to be intimidated. The answer? Mississippians don't know how to surrender. After shelling the city for several weeks, the fleet was withdrawn. The Union Navy had failed. A major general named Ulysses S. Grant was given full command of the Union Army in the West. Grant also was given a single objective: to take Vicksburg and clear the Mississippi River. At the same time, Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton was placed in command of the Confederate troops defending the Mississippi. His job? To keep the supply lines open and prevent the South from losing the river. A year passes, and 4 major campaigns to take the city from the north and from the river all end in failure. In the spring of 1863, Grant was no closer to taking Vicksburg than he had been the year before. Fortress Vicksburg still defied the Union. The Union commander was left with one daring plan. He'd march his army down the west bank of the Mississippi through Louisiana, cross the river south of Vicksburg, and attack the city from the rear. As April ended, Grant was ready to move on the same side of the river as his enemy. Pushing aside a small garrison at Port Gibson and defeating the forces at Raymond, he occupied Jackson. General Joe Johnston, aware that he was far outnumbered, had withdrawn to the north. As Grant moved towards his objective, Pemberton brought a portion of his army out of Vicksburg. The two forces clashed at the Champion Plantation. Nearly 7,000 Confederate and Union soldiers died at Champion Hill. Pemberton was forced to withdraw back to his Vicksburg defenses. May 17th was a Sunday, bright and growing hot. Mississippi summer was approaching. So was Grant's army. The twilight of that Sabbath day was terrifying to the residents of Gibraltar.
My pen almost refuses to tell of our terrible disaster. We are defeated, our army in confusion, and the carnage awful. I hope never to witness such a scene as the return of our routed army. From 12 o'clock until late, the streets and roads were jammed with everything that pertains to an army. What is to become of all the living things in this place? God only knows.
As morning dawned, Grant faced Vicksburg's formidable land defenses. 9 earthen forts connected by a line of trenches for 9 miles encircling the city. As the Union guns opened on the works, the siege of Vicksburg had begun.
The Yankees are at our entrenchments. The firing seems all along toward the Jackson Road to the grave. Still, all seems confusion, and we're cut off from all knowledge of the outside world. A general battle is expected at daylight tomorrow.
The Union forces now completely invested the city. Vicksburg's Confederate defenders were now sandwiched between the Union Army on one side and the Union Navy on the other. With the Union victory at Champion Hill, Grant believed Pemberton to be demoralized and whipped. As the Union guns shelled the city all morning, a general assault was ordered for the afternoon. He'd take the city by storm. As the Union shells rained on the city and mortars exploded above their heads, the women and children sought safety.
In the hills about Vicksburg, dug caves for the women and children to take refuge in. In the northeastern part was a very high hill in which a large cave was dug. And in this cave, my mother took refuge with her 3 children.
But if the women and children of Vicksburg were beginning to feel the effects of war, so too were the Union soldiers. One Union sergeant wrote,
"At precisely 2 o'clock, our brave boys moved across the hill at double quick, through a most deadly crossfire of grape, canister, shot, and shell. But we heeded it not. Our comrades were falling around us at every step. Some killed instantly, others have an arm or leg shot off, and wounds of all descriptions."
Throughout the day, Union troops assaulted the lines and Confederate troops fought a desperate defense. As darkness neared, the Union troops were pulled back, leaving nearly 1,000 Federal soldiers dead. Grant's first attempt to take Vicksburg by storm had been a bloody failure. Grant was undaunted by the costly failure of the Union assault 4 days earlier. He ordered a second major assault on Vicksburg works. Union gunners, both Army and Navy, bombarded the defenses for hours before the ground attack.
It is 8 o'clock, and there comes an order that there will be a general charge, that we will try our strength to force the enemy from his secure position. It is a solemn time, these 2 hours, for well we know it is the last some of us will have to live.
While the anticipation of death created fear among Union troops, the women and children of Vicksburg and their Confederate defenders were also terrorized by the sound of the big guns.
The shot fell thick and fast. We sat or stood under the ground, thinking each moment would be our last.
Suddenly, the roar of the guns ceased. The enemy seemed to be springing from the bowels of the earth. A magnificent line in each direction, moving at double quick. I at once commanded my men to rise up and open fire on the enemy. I was knocked down and stunned temporarily. When I looked again, I don't think it an exaggeration to say there were 1,000 Yankees on the slope in front of me. The slope was literally blue. For a brief moment, the enemy had breached our defenses, but were driven out.
As darkness neared, the firing ceased, and the enemy returned to their covers. The loss of the enemy was enormous. For more than 200 yards, their bodies lay so thick that one might have walked the whole distance on them without touching the ground.
The morning light of a new day revealed the horrors of Grant's second unsuccessful assault. The Union troops lay where they'd fallen, many dead, some wounded and still alive. The gallant defenders of Vicksburg were determined. Fortress Vicksburg would not be taken. Grant now decided to outcamp the enemy, and the Union general ordered regular siege operations to begin. As the siege operations increased, so too did the intensity of the shelling.
There is no possibility of riding regularly. We have spent the last 2 nights in a cave. Tonight, I think we'll stay at home. It's not safe, I know, for the shells are falling all around us. But I hope none may strike us. It's horrible. I suppose there never was a case before of a besieged town when the guns from front and back met and passed each other.
People do nothing but eat what they can get, sleep when they can, and dodge the shells. There are 3 intervals when the shelling stops. About 8 in the morning, the same in the evening, and at noon. I suppose they stop for meals.
I have not even undressed now for nearly 2 weeks. But the children have behaved like little heroes. At night, when the balls begin to fly like pigeons over our tent, and we must flee to the caves, the children spring up like soldiers, slip on their shoes, and run up the hill.
War is a great equalizer of people, and no longer does wealth and prosperity have any benefit for the cave dwellers of Vicksburg. For the first time in their lives, some of them face the fear of starvation. Mothers such as Miss Lord and Miss Lawborough were forced to pick tender sprouts from the cane brakes to feed their whimpering children. The sprouts gave a comforting taste, but very little nourishment.
I am so tired of cornbread, which I never liked, that I eat it with tears in my eyes. We are lucky to get a quart of milk a day from a family with a cow. I send $5 to market each morning, and it buys only a small piece of mule meat.
Bread was a staple that haunted the women in these caves. As long as the cornmeal lasted, it could be mixed with ground field peas and baked into what was called pea bread. Pea bread was dirty, black, heavy as lead, and virtually indigestible. As the siege wore on, there'd not be enough pea bread. The Vicksburg newspaper reported flour selling at $5 a pound, molasses for $10 a gallon, and corn at $10 a bushel. Worse than these charges, one citizen said, nobody had the money, and then nobody had the flour. The soldiers fared no better. They lived on half rations, usually 1 or 2 biscuits, a small piece of greasy bacon, and a spoonful of rice or peas. As one dreary day followed another, the soldiers would talk of dining on cats, dogs, and other small deer. One soldier wrote of making a hearty meal of fried rats.
Sitting in the cave one evening, I heard the most heart-rending screams and moans. I was told that a mother had taken her child into a cave, and having laid it on its bed safely, as the poor woman believed, she took her seat near the entrance to the cave. A mortar shell exploded with such force, it cut through the earth into the cave and crushed the head of the sleeping child. Oh, most horrible sight to the mother.
As the work of slaughter and destruction wore on, even the children in the caves became accustomed to the continuous sounds of bombs and mortars. Disaster after disaster rained upon the cave people. Disasters described by one suffering woman as making our lives a living death. Through their trial, the people relied on their faith to sustain them. Public prayers were held in the caves, and the doors of the Christ Episcopal Church were never closed.
Reverend Lloyd rang his church bell every Sunday and tried to have services. I walked there and back, but I was glad to do so for the sake of worshiping once more. The church had been considerably injured and was so filled with brick, mortar, and glass that it was difficult to find a place to sit.
As the 4th week of the siege began, the Confederate commander, General Pemberton, continued to send urgent messages for help. But Pemberton wasn't aware that Confederate General Joe Johnston already had wired a fateful memo to Jefferson Davis. I consider saving Vicksburg hopeless. On the other side of the lines, Grant's army was growing stronger as new troops arrived each week, and the siege lines pushed so close to the defenses that in many places, attacking and defending soldiers were separated by only a few yards. The soldiers engaged in frequent conversations despite their uniforms and loyalties. Often during nighttime lulls in shooting, they'd meet to inquire about friends or relatives on the other sides of the lines. One Missouri Confederate located his brother in a Union regiment. A Vicksburg soldier had saved money for their mother in Missouri and wanted the brother to send it to her. Other soldiers would meet to trade southern tobacco for northern coffee. But when daybreak came, these nighttime friends would part to shoot at each other again.
Today was the most horrible yet to me, because I've lost my nerve. We were all in the cellar when a shell came tearing through the roof and burst upstairs. The pieces came through both floors into the cellar. For the first time I quailed, for now I realized that something worse than death might come. I might be crippled and not killed, and that thought broke down my courage. I pleaded to get out of this horrible place.
In the trenches, Union sharpshooters waited, their guns trained on openings in the defense lines where unfortunate defenders were likely to show themselves. Such a mistake could bring instant death, or perhaps worse, a wound to an arm or leg which necessitated amputation, usually a slower, more agonizing prescription for death.
My business was with the wounded and dying. At a brigade hospital, a young man whose knee had been shattered had been laid upon the surgeon's table. The surgeon's knife and saw quickly performed the bloody task. The poor soldier was then borne off to his bunk, where he must lie for weeks, unless he's carried to his grave, which was the case with more than half upon which this operation was performed.
I have seen wheelbarrows of legs and arms buried. There were 1,500 wounded men in and around the place. I heard their screams and groans all night and all day. There was no rest for anybody.
After weeks of bombardment, a Confederate sergeant wrote, Vicksburg presented a fearful spectacle. Houses dilapidated and in ruins. Avenues almost deserted save by hunger-pinched, starving, and wounded soldiers. Lice and filth covered their bodies, delicate women and little children with pale, hollow-eyed features peering from the caves and the hillsides.
Still in this dreadful cave. Who would have believed that we could have borne such a life for 5 weeks? Yet no relief. Every day this week, we have waited for the sound of General Johnston's guns, but in vain.
The soldiers had lived at their post in the trenches through blistering heat, steamy summer rains, and damp, humid nights. Without relief, the Confederate troops were now also weakened by hunger, exposure, and disease. Nearly 7,000 of the South's troops were either sick or wounded or both. The death toll stalked Confederate General Pemberton closer than Grant. It was obvious the beleaguered commander could last little longer. No one can know when Pemberton lost all hope of being relieved. The general wrote to his corps commanders on the 46th day, asking their advice. The staff was virtually unanimous. Surrender the garrison. There was one dissent. That was not enough. General Johnston was far away. Grant's army, and reality, was ever present. The tired Southern commander took pen in hand and began to compose his message to Ulysses S. Grant. General, I have the honor to present to you an armistice with the view of arranging terms for the capitulation of Vicksburg. For the first time in 47 days, the guns were silent as Grant and Pemberton met in a valley between the lines. A single oak tree shaded the two weary commanders as they debated reality. Both knew the end had come. The generals returned to their lines. Before sunrise, Pemberton would accept the terms of surrender.
People could be seen walking around concluding that the silence meant dreadful things for tomorrow. Everyone thought Grant would make the effort of his life to take the city on the 4th of July. My father came to Mother with tears in his eyes. He said, "You can all come home for the night's rest. General Pemberton has surrendered. General Grant will enter the city in the morning."
White flags of surrender floated above the Confederate works. Reverend Lord went to his family.
He came into the cave as pale as death and said, "Maggie, take the children home directly. The town is surrendered." After 2 years of trial and disappointed hopes, the tears would come, and my heart sank within me with sorrow. I was speechless with grief. As I started up the hill with the children, the tears began to flow. All the way home I wept incessantly, meeting first one group of soldiers and then another, many of them with tears streaming down their faces.
The end had come. In the steaming heat of the July 4th afternoon, General Grant led his conquering army into the city which had defied the overwhelming forces of the Union for almost 2 years. The army approached the town along the winding Jackson Road. When the long blue line reached the town, Grant sat motionless on his horse as the final symbol of victory was raised above the courthouse. The Union troops cheered as the flag floated above the majestic building, but one lady perhaps spoke for all of Vicksburg when she said simply, "We cried. The glory had vanished." No longer would Fortress Vicksburg control the great Mississippi River, and with it the fortunes of the South in the Great War. The city of Vicksburg, however, had written one of the bravest stories of any war, a story of death, determination, tears, and suffering, a story of 47 days of dogged determination, spirit, and dedication. For Vicksburg today, a legacy of courage. The inhumanity of man against man had taken its bloody toll. Nearly 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers lay buried in the Mississippi soil, separated in death as they had been in battle. With the fall of Vicksburg came the beginning of the end of the Confederacy. For nearly 2 more years, the dream would live on. But with the surrender of Vicksburg and the Confederate defeat at Gettysburg, the final outcome of the war was never seriously in doubt. The dream died at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. The great American Civil War, after 4 long years, was finally ended. More than 500,000 men had given their lives in this great conflict, described by historians as the bloodiest of all wars which history had recorded.